everybody. Welcome to the Citizen Trade Policy Commission. Bob Saucier, and we'll be starting today with introductions around the room. If we could get started maybe to our right.
My name's Jay Wadley. I'm with the Machinists Union, and I represent labor.
I'm Sharon Treat, and I've just been appointed to represent environmental groups. And I did want to mention for new members that I also serve representing Maine on the Intergovernmental Policy Advisory Committee, which is the state and local level advisory committee to the U.S. Trade Representative. So.
Good morning, I'm Craig Hickman. I represent District 81, Winthrop Reed Field, and a part of North Monmouth at the foot of Mount Pisgah, and I've recently been appointed to this committee as the House Representative. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Representative Stacey Guerin. I represent Glenburn, Levant, and Kenduskeag.
Linda Pisner, I'm the designee of the Attorney General.
And I'm Jim Dietert. I'm an industry representative from Munlika Healthcare. Previously was with Rhinell, and this is my first meeting. I look forward to it. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Michael Karagianis from the Maine DEP, and I'd like to welcome everybody here this morning, our new members too. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I forgot to mention I'm from Presque Isle, so I'm way up north. And we have a contact sheet going around. Have we got one yet? We're going to circulate a contact sheet. If you could put your name and your phone number, email address, whatever you have that you can put down and give it to us, that would be great. Having meetings like this, contacting people is a big deal. You know, people can't be here, whatever. So once we get that circulated, and our staff person is Locke Kiermeyer. He's the one that runs this whole show, basically. He's our staff person, and he does all the agenda, all the packets you have in front of you. He produced all that. So he's a valuable person on our staff. The commission probably wouldn't run without him. So thank you, Locke, for doing this.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity.
Thank you. So as that sheet is circulating around, you can go ahead and fill it out with your name and all that's required on there. And the Citizen Trade Policy Commission is an organization that basically, you know, gives our federal representatives the feeling and the view of the state of Maine and how we feel and how we run the commission, and we send correspondence accordingly to our trade representatives and our people in Washington. So Locke Kiermeyer is going to be doing a review of the Citizen Trade Policy Commission. We're almost all new members on here, so this is a learning curve for everybody except for maybe Sharon and Jay down at the end. So I think we're all new on this side. The Attorney General, you're not new. You are new also? Okay, so we are all new, so no, basically.
Well, Linda's been on the commission before.
Okay.
And so has Mike.
All right,
so I could say.
So probably half of us are new.
If I could just jump in a little bit. I mentioned when I introduced myself that I serve on IGPAC, which is the State and Local Government Advisory Committee to the USTR. What that means is I had to go through this FBI security clearance to be allowed to read documents that the U.S. government is considering in all of these negotiations, their proposed text. So because of that, I have read some of the proposals from the U.S. government on TISA as well as the other ones. And what I just wanted to add to what Locke has said is the trade and services, it's hard to imagine what isn't. When I think of services, I don't know what that means, really, but it really means almost everything that goes on. And there's a number of areas where this could have significant implications for the ability of state governments to be the ones in charge of the things that they're in charge of right now. And my perspective perhaps is influenced from having served on the insurance committee for many years. Insurance is one of those areas where state governments have the primary responsibility for coming up with the rules and regulations across the United States. The goal of something like TISA is to have the same rules across the entire United States and between all of those other countries. So that is an area where potentially there could be very significant inroads into what the state of Maine would consider its sovereignty or its current role of government. And so that's just one example. Some of the other things that are involved in services, and this is why the state Supreme Court justices are actually represented on IGPAC, it would get into issues about qualifications of lawyers, for example, qualifications for engineers, qualifications, well, all the things that the LCRED, all those professions, it would be about if someone applies for a job and they've been qualified as an engineer in country X, and they apply for a job in the US, potentially, depending on how it's written, you couldn't say, well, in the state of Maine, engineers need to meet these other qualifications in order to do this job. So you can think of all the different services that are out there, professional jobs that have licensing boards. And so that is what this is about, and it might be something that the commission wants to learn more about. We kind of just got wind of this recently, but it might be something the commission wants to look at in more detail, in the future in terms of understanding what the implications might be for state government, decision-making. I'm sorry.
I just had a question for Sharon. So you're saying the treaty would supersede Maine law?
Potentially, yes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that more with respect to my presentation on the transatlantic agreement. But absolutely, yes. It's about harmonizing regulations so that trade, including services, moves freely. So it has some really significant implications.
Brings us to Sharon Treat's update and briefing.
And would I do it from here? Is that all right, or do you want me to go?
Put your,
Is
mic
this
on.
all right, or do you want me to go?
It's completely up to you. If you're comfortable there, that's probably quicker.
It's easier for me,
Yep.
yeah. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I thought it would be useful for the commission to have an update on some of the things going on with the TTIP or TTIP or the transatlantic agreement, which one of the things that is open to members of the commission, and I would encourage you to think about perhaps doing this at a future round, the negotiations between the European Union and the US are taking place generally in Washington, D.C., although they had the last round in New York and Brussels. And when it's in Washington, D.C. or elsewhere in the U.S., there is an opportunity, they call it a stakeholder day, for businesses, for organizations, for state legislators to go and make presentations. For example, say presenting what the Trade Commission might think on a certain topic. And so the commission has been represented in the past by me going in and making presentations on certain topics that we agreed we wanted to have presented. And I've continued to do that, not necessarily representing the commission unless I've been asked to do so, but also on my own volition. So there have been 2 rounds of negotiations since the last time the Trade Commission met. And I did put together a little memo about some of the things that have gone on, and I thought that...
It's page 56 for
yes, thank you very
in their
much.
packet.
Page 56. I thought it would be particularly useful for the commission to know about one particular chapter that's being proposed, because although there is something about this in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it's being proposed in a very comprehensive way in the negotiations with the European Union, particularly from the European Union side. And one of the interesting things that's going on in the negotiations with the European Union is the first thing that went on is that members of their parliament do get copies of negotiating text, and right from the beginning, they have leaked it to the public because they thought that the public ought to see it. So I think partly because these texts were being leaked anyway, and because there's a lot of public interest in the European Union about this agreement, the European Commission, which is the one that is doing the negotiations, has actually made a decision to publicly post the text that they bring to the United States negotiators, you know, and discuss. So the discussions are in secret. The U.S. proposals are secret, but the European Union proposals actually are not secret. They have been posting them like 2 days after the negotiation round in which they are discussed. And one of the areas where they are very interested in doing something is on this thing that they call regulatory cooperation. So I want to talk a bit about that, and also just what the attitude is in the European Union, where I've had the opportunity to go there back in April and meet with members of the European Parliament who were with the Agriculture and the Environment Committees from all political parties. It was a very interesting meeting. And then I also attended a 2-day meeting on this regulatory cooperation proposal, which there's a lot of concern about that as well. And what I wanted to mention is this first is about ISDS, which we already have heard about, or the Investor State Settlement, Dispute Settlement Mechanism. It's really, even though it's been in some other trade agreements, the main place where it is right now that we see is in NAFTA. And it is proposed to be in both the Trans-Pacific and the Transatlantic Agreement. In the European Union, it is extremely controversial. And there are some national governments in the European Union that have already passed resolutions in opposition to it. And it has become such a hot issue that the European Commission opened what they call a consultation. And they do this for other issues that they work on. And what they do is they have this online consultation where they say, okay, we're thinking of doing this ISDS clause in this trade agreement. You know, please weigh in on whether this is what you think of this. And I wrote in my memo that it was 88% said they didn't want it. There was, I think, over 150,000 comments were submitted, which is one of the most on any topic. It's not the most, apparently. There's been some other things that were more, but it's among the most, and it's all the European Union countries. So we're talking about, 32 different national countries where citizens, organizations, businesses wrote in and commented on that. And somewhere between 88 and 97% said we don't want it. The European Union is actually planning to come out with a new version of this ISDS, which they say will address many of the concerns. They're the same things that have been mentioned by Locke, the fact that there's no appeal, the fact that there is a panel of arbitrators who do not necessarily, that may have conflicts of interest because one day they're representing, the corporation, and then the next day, they're ruling on a matter that is of interest to that corporation. And it also goes around the court system. So Linda discussed the Bilcon case. One of the things about that case is that these 3 arbitrators, actually it was a split decision, 2 of them said, we think there might be a violation of Canadian law. Well, that company never went to the Canadian courts to say, we think this panel denied our permit improperly, please overturn it. Instead, they said, no, we like the deal of going through the NAFTA arbitration system where we can ask for $300 million in damages without actually investing anything in building this particular thing. And what caught my eye about that particular decision is that I remember when there was a proposal to put liquefied natural gas terminal in Harpswell, and the fishing community essentially killed it because of concerns about impacts on the fishing community. And there's a lot of similarities between the Digby Neck region of Nova Scotia and the Maine coastline. So it kind of rang home to me that, this is something that we might want to be paying attention to. And as Locke mentioned, we have written letters in the past about the ISDS provisions, which are all on the website. So that is a hot topic in the European Union. The other area where there's a huge amount of interest in the US-EU agreement is around food and agriculture. And again, as Locke mentioned, every 2 years the Trade Commission has a report. We're required by law to commission a report about what are the trade impacts, the impacts of trade policy on the state of Maine, good, bad, and indifferent. You know, what are they? And as you've heard already, the topics are so broad that in the last couple of years, what the Commission has done is gone through a process of discussing among ourselves to say, you know, what are the things we think we should try to focus on that are kind of happening now. And so this last year, the topic that was chosen was food policy and agriculture. And indeed, there were a number of issues that were brought up, including potential threats to the whole the milk pricing system, and the Maine Dairy Commission system that we have that helps, you know, moderate prices and assist farmers in that regard. So in the Transatlantic Agreement, or TTIP, there's going to be, and again, this is something that has been posted on the European Union's website of the Commission. There is a whole proposal on what is called SPS, or sanitary or phytosanitary. It basically is food safety standards, okay? And anything to do with food safety, pesticide residues, any of those things. And they have posted a proposal on that on their website. And that is an area where we might want to be just learning more about it, because it very much is intended to do what they call is regulatory coherence, where the standards in the United States and the US and the EU are deemed equivalent or made the same. And why that is of particular interest, I think, in the state of Maine is that to the extent that we have any policies that are different from the US government's policies, whether it's on pesticide applications, whether it's on GMO labeling, whatever it might be, those are things that through this trade agreement could be, there could be language adopted as part of it that would say that we aren't allowed to have anything different from what the US government has. And in fact, in the leaked and then posted document around SPS, which is food safety, text, the European Union proposal says in it that if there's a food safety standard, it must apply to the entire region of the party, and the party in this case would be the United States. So they're saying all the policies have to be the same across the entire country. So that, you know, I know there's a big interest in this, you know, from a number of people, including on this commission, around food sovereignty issues and all of that, and it very directly goes towards that. So that is something, and that is also of interest in the European Union, because they don't want to have the same policies we have in the US. They do have stricter policies around some of their food standards, and they don't allow, I think there's something like 82 or 72 or 82 pesticide ingredients that are not allowed in the European Union but are allowed in the US, so they don't want to see those pesticide residues on their food if it's imported, you know. So it's a big issue, and it's one where there may be some similarity of interest between what people in the state of Maine think and what some of the European Union folks think. They're also
Can I
looking.
interrupt for a question?
Yeah.
So I was sort of thinking along those same lines. So wouldn't it be in a way a positive thing for us if the European Union negotiates with the U.S. government and they get the U.S. government to the point where they are looking at similar sorts of food safety?
You mean bringing it up?
Yeah. So overall, it seems to me like it actually could have a positive benefit.
That would be the great, exciting thing that could theoretically happen.
Yeah.
but it does not seem to be what anybody is proposing.
Okay.
So, and that's because there's a lot of other provisions that I'm not gonna get into the gory detail of, that talk about no more trade restrictive than necessary, for example. So, but that's one of the things. So if they're looking at a policy, I mean, it may be overstating the case to say the lowest common denominator. That may be overstating the case, but the idea is to come up with a mutual policy that is less restrictive on trade, and that means less regulation. So, from their point of view. So, you're right, it could harmonize up, but so far, there doesn't seem to be anyone who's actually at the negotiating table talking about that. But that is certainly something that we have talked about as a commission, and when we wrote a letter about our report, we said, this is where, you know, there are things here that could be positive. So, you know, it bears watching. There's a few other issues that could affect us there. The European Union is looking to have a separate chapter on energy and raw materials. And this could have implications, again, for issues around, say, LNG storage in the coast, or if the state of Maine wants to have different rules around pipelines. And one of the big issues for the state of Maine could be procurement. In past agreements, the state has always had the authority to make a decision about whether or not to have its rules bound by these trade agreements. And in this case, the European Union, one of its primary goals is to have authority to have its companies bid on state procurement. So that would mean that that would change what what Maine does right now, because Maine has not agreed to have its purchasing decisions as a state, using state taxpayer money, have to say, you know, go out to bid to a European company, for example. It could decide to just do it within the U.S., and that would be a big change. Then finally, briefly on regulatory cooperation, as I said, this is a new proposal, and the European Union has come up with this proposal where they've actually made it less onerous than it was when it was first proposed. However, it very much is intended to take a look at what U.S. state governments are doing before they do it, okay? So what they're interested in is knowing what kind of legislation is being proposed in the state of Maine and every other state, as well as regulations. Now, they originally proposed that any legislator would have to send a list of their bills in advance to this new regulatory cooperation body, which is made up of European and U.S. essentially trade regulators. The more recent proposal says they won't do that, but instead, if anyone on that regulatory body wants to see what's going on in the state of Maine, then the state of Maine would have to share these documents with the federal government, which would then try to facilitate a discussion between these people on the regulatory cooperation body and the state of Maine legislators about why maybe we shouldn't do the policy that we're thinking of doing. So as a former state legislator, I'm just going to be tell you right out front that I find this proposal offensive, and I did speak to that issue at the most recent stakeholder presentation that they had in New York City. The U.S. has a proposal. I have seen it. I'm not allowed to tell you about it because it's secret, and I would lose my security clearance and maybe go to jail. I will say that I can say it's not the same as the European Union proposal, and I think it's pretty clear that the U.S. negotiators don't really like the European Union proposal either, because it would also propose to interfere with what members of Congress do. I mean, it's very intrusive, and it's even more intrusive in terms of the U.S. Congress having to provide lists in advance of what legislation they're planning to introduce, which, as we all know, for strategic and other reasons, like we just thought it up, we may not come up with these proposals a year in advance and want to share them with the European Union regulators. So that is a very big issue, and it's starting to become an issue just like this ISDS investor-state settlement in the European Union, where they're much more on top of this stuff, partly because they view the U.S. as this behemoth that might squash them somehow. And so they're more skeptical of an agreement with the United States. But I actually think there's a lot of similarities of interest between what many Maine legislators might think and what some of these European Union parliamentarians. So that's just a summary, and I wrote up in the memo about it, and then these negotiations are basically continuing with this transatlantic agreement between the U.S. and Brussels every couple of months, and so the next round is going to be in July in Brussels.
Thank you very much.